A millionaire CEO stops when a little girl offers him flowers in the snow, but when she whispers, "Please find my mommy," they took her. His entire world turns upside down. What he uncovers next will haunt you, and what the girl has been hiding will leave you in tears. Stay till the end, because the truth is more heartbreaking than fiction. Before we dive into today's emotional story, tell me, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? I'd love to know. Under the soft, flickering glow of a lonely New York street lamp, the city pulsed with its usual chaos: honking cabs, hurried footsteps, neon reflections on wet asphalt. But in the quiet corner near a bakery that had long closed for the night stood a small figure almost invisible to the world, an 8-year-old girl with golden curls tangled beneath a worn woolen cap, dressed in a faded jacket too thin for the biting cold, and a sharp pink frock that had once belonged to better days, her trembling hands clutching a fragile bouquet of slightly wilted flowers wrapped in old newspaper, and though her cheeks were flushed from the wind, her lips bore a tired smile, the kind not born from joy, but from stubborn hope, a rehearsed mask she'd worn far too many nights in the absence of comfort, her blue eyes scanning every passing stranger not in expectation, but in silent prayer that someone, anyone, might finally stop and look, not at her clothes or the flowers, but at her, and yet they rushed by, eyes glued to phone screens, hearts locked behind indifference, missing the tiny voice that whispered, "Would you like a flower?" A voice too soft to cut through the noise but too brave to vanish into it, and behind her, the cold crept slowly into her bones, but she stayed rooted, because she had nowhere else to go. No one waiting at home, no home at all, only the street and her bouquet, and the fading memory of a mother's voice promising she'd be right back. Promises that turned into hours, then days, then aching silence, and as the wind picked up and rustled her thin sleeves, Emma blinked the sting from her eyes and looked up again, just in time to see a sleek, royal blue car pull to the curb, its headlights painting silver lines across the wet sidewalk, and the door opened to reveal a man so out of place in this scene that it seemed surreal. A tall, handsome figure in a perfectly tailored, blue suit, shoes polished, tie neat, his black hair swept back like a man carved out of control and confidence, yet his eyes, sharp and ocean blue, darted across the sidewalk with a strange kind of searching, as though he too were lost but in a different kind of way, and when his gaze fell on Emma, something inside him paused, as if the city's noise dulled for just a second, as if the rhythm of life staggered under the weight of one small truth. She was not supposed to be here, not like this, not alone, not in the cold with nothing but dying flowers and a smile too heavy for her age, and though he'd passed beggars before, ignored outstretched hands, dismissed street vendors with polite nods, something about this little girl made him take a step forward without thinking, and Emma didn't flinch, she only looked up, lifted her bouquet with delicate fingers and whispered, "It's my last one, it's not perfect, but it still smells nice." Her voice a trembling thread of courage wrapped in sorrow, and Nathaniel knelt before her, the cold of the pavement biting through his pants as he stared at the raw red of her knuckles, the stiffness in her tiny shoulders, the way she clutched the flowers like they were the last piece of something sacred, and in that closeness, he saw what others didn't, the resilience behind her blue eyes, the ache she wasn't old enough to name, the quiet way she waited for rejection like an old friend, and his voice, usually sharp and firm in boardrooms, softened unexpectedly as he asked, "Why are you out here by yourself, little one?" But she only glanced down, her breath fogging the air, and said something that shattered his composure. "Mommy's not coming back tonight." A sentence so quiet, so raw, so filled with silent acceptance that it echoed in his chest louder than anything he'd heard all year, because once, long ago, someone had said those words to him. And suddenly this wasn't just a street, and she wasn't just a girl, she was a mirror of a past he'd buried beneath money, power, and polished suits, and he didn't care if his driver was watching, or if curious stares followed him from across the street, because in this one moment, all that mattered was the fragile life in front of him, and when he reached for his wallet, she shook her head, refusing the cash, and that made him pause even more, because people didn't turn down money, not here, not in this city, but she had, and he realized she wasn't selling the flower for profit, She was offering a piece of her fading hope in exchange for something far rarer: acknowledgement, presence, maybe even love. And without speaking, he took the flower and placed it gently in his inner suit pocket, close to his heart, then looked back at her and said nothing. Because what do you say to a child whose pain sits quietly beneath her skin, buried but breathing? And in that silence, something passed between them, a spark, a bridge, the beginning of something neither of them yet understood, but both felt deeply. And when she turned to walk back to her alley, he stopped her with a soft touch on her shoulder. And though he didn't know where this would lead, though he had no plan, no idea what tomorrow would bring, he knew one thing with absolute certainty: he couldn't leave her here, not tonight, not ever, because that tiny sentence, "Mommy's not coming back," had pulled something out of him he thought had long since died. And from that moment on, Nathaniel Rhodes, the untouchable CEO, was no longer the same man. Nathaniel felt the small fingers wrap around his own like a whispered prayer, delicate yet firm, as though this little girl had made peace with trusting a stranger simply because her soul was too tired to keep guarding itself. He glanced down at her. Emma, her golden hair still catching faint city light like an angel misplaced in shadows, and in that moment he realized something unshakable. The boardrooms could wait, the contracts could burn, but this little hand in his couldn't be ignored. "Come," he said softly again, not as a command, but as a quiet hope, and together they stepped out of the alley, his shiny leather shoes making muted thuds beside her light, uneven steps. The city's noise seemed to dim around them as though the night itself paused to witness something sacred. He glanced once more at the wilted flower still cradled in his hand. How was it that something plucked from a crack in the sidewalk carried more weight than anything he'd signed with ink and gold? Emma's silence said volumes, but Nathaniel couldn't help it. He needed to know more, so he asked again, gently this time, "Do you remember where your mom was going?" And Emma looked up with those soul-deep blue eyes and answered not with words, but a slow, painful shake of her head. "She just said to wait, and not be scared," she finally murmured. And the ache behind her voice hollowed something inside him. "And you've waited. How long?" he asked, half hoping she wouldn't answer. But she held up 3 tiny fingers, hesitated and whispered, "Maybe 4 days, or 5. I forget when I last had a warm meal." And those words crashed into Nathaniel like waves against brittle stone, knocking down walls he didn't even know still existed in him. "What about your dad?" he asked instinctively, and the look that crossed Emma's face silenced the air. It was a cocktail of confusion, grief, and something like apology. "Mommy said he was a good dream, before he left the real world," she said quietly, and Nathaniel swallowed hard, suddenly unsure of how to breathe. He was a man used to certainty, to equations and earnings, yet here was a little girl undoing him with fragments of her truth. As they walked past shop windows reflecting mismatched pairs, one dressed in luxury, the other in pain, passers-by glanced but didn't pause, and Nathaniel realized how easy it was for the world to miss what truly mattered. He guided her gently into a small cafe on the corner, not one of his usual upscale choices but warm, lit with amber bulbs and the smell of cinnamon and safety. Emma hesitated at the door, but he gave her hand a tiny reassuring squeeze, and she followed. The barista blinked at them, clearly puzzled, but said nothing when Nathaniel ordered 2 hot chocolates and a sandwich without breaking eye contact with Emma, as if afraid she'd vanish if he looked away. They sat at a quiet booth in the corner, and for the first time since she spoke, Emma's shoulders dropped just a little, her eyes scanning the steam rising from the cocoa like it was a miracle. "You must be hungry," Nathaniel said softly, and she nodded, but didn't touch the food just yet. Instead, she pulled something from her pocket, a small crumpled drawing of a stick-figure woman with big yellow hair and a heart over her head, and placed it on the table like it was a sacred map. "That's Mommy," she whispered, tracing the heart with her finger, and Nathaniel felt tears pressing behind his eyes with an intensity that stunned him. "She has the prettiest laugh." "You'd like her," Emma added, and he forced a smile even as his throat tightened. Because how did you respond to a child trying to protect the dignity of a mother who disappeared behind a dumpster? "Do you remember anything else? Where she might have gone? Anyone she spoke to?" he asked gently, and Emma blinked, trying hard to remember, then whispered, "She was scared. She said people were chasing her dreams away, but she promised she'd win them back." And Nathaniel couldn't help but feel a strange familiarity in those words. It reminded him of a time, long ago, when he'd watched his own mother cry behind a locked door while pretending to be brave for him. "I'm not gonna let you sleep outside tonight," he said finally, with quiet resolve, and Emma just looked at him, wary and wondering, before asking, "Do people like you really keep promises?" And Nathaniel didn't answer with words. He simply placed the crumpled flower on the table, right beside her, drawing, like a vow written in silence. She looked at it, then at him, and for a heartbeat longer than time, nothing moved, until she slowly picked up the cup with both hands and took a sip, her eyes fluttering shut for just a second, like she was savoring more than chocolate, like she was tasting warmth, safety, and maybe the beginning of something like home. Nathaniel leaned back, breath catching in his chest as her tiny feet dangled from the booth seat, and something ancient stirred inside him. A forgotten dream, a promise unspoken, a question he never expected to ask, but one that now screamed in his bones. Why her? And why does this feel like fate? Nathaniel held her tiny hand as if it were glass, fragile, irreplaceable, and led her quietly through the night, each step echoing a promise he didn't fully understand yet. The city's brightness pressed against the darkness of the alleys they left behind, but her silence never loosened its grip. When they arrived at the grand entrance of the five-star restaurant, the doorman blinked, stunned, but stepped aside with a nod, unsure what to say as a millionaire walked in with a child in soggy shoes. Inside, chandeliers spilled light across marble floors and velvet chairs. Elegant music floated like perfume in the air, and guests in tailored suits and diamond necklaces turned curiously toward the unlikely pair. Nathaniel didn't pause. He led Emma to his private table near the tall windows, gently pulled out a chair, and guided her into it like he was tucking in royalty. Her fingers clutched the edge of the seat, eyes wide, neck craned to look at ceilings too high for her world. "You okay?" he asked softly, crouching beside her again. She nodded faintly, lips pressed together, the little flower still clenched in her other hand. A waiter approached with forced politeness, glancing nervously at Emma, but Nathaniel spoke before he would ask a question. "Hot cocoa," he said firmly. "Extra marshmallows, and bring something warm. Something that feels like home." The waiter nodded and disappeared, clearly confused but not brave enough to comment. Emma looked around the room, eyes darting from crystal glasses to napkins folded like crowns, to women laughing behind silk fans. "I don't belong here," she whispered, barely audible. Nathaniel leaned closer, eyes gentle. "You do now." Her gaze met his, mistrusting, unsure, but softening. She folded her arms tightly, shrinking into herself, until the cocoa arrived. She wrapped her fingers around the cup like it was a fire in winter, and took a careful sip, steam curling under her nose. "This is the warmest I've been in weeks," she murmured, not meeting his eyes. That single sentence clutched his heart in a way he didn't expect. It was more piercing than any shareholder's betrayal, more honest than any contract he'd signed. He studied her as she sat there, swinging her legs slightly, the flower still cradled in her left hand, cocoa in her right, a child caught between survival and hope. "How long were you out there, Emma?" he asked gently, his voice slower now. She shrugged. "I don't count days anymore. Just stars." Nathaniel swallowed hard, not sure what to say. She continued, almost mechanically, like she had repeated these facts to herself at night to stay sane. "Mom used to come back after 2 nights, sometimes 3. But this time, it's been forever." Her words hit like glass against stone, sharp, unfiltered, haunting. "Did she leave you food?" he asked, careful not to let his voice tremble. "A granola bar," she answered plainly, "and half a water bottle." She kissed my head and said, "I'll be right back, Starshine." That was the last thing. She said it so clearly, so matter-of-fact, it felt like she'd memorized her heartbreak. Nathaniel didn't know whether to comfort her or break apart himself. "And your dad?" he asked cautiously. She hesitated, lips thinning, then whispered, "He was never really part of our story." Nathaniel stared at the silverware, suddenly too polished, too clean. "Do you believe people come back?" Emma asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Her question caught him off guard. He opened his mouth but closed it again, uncertain. Sometimes, he said eventually, but sometimes, someone else shows up who never lets go again. Her eyes flickered with something unnameable, hope, maybe, or a memory of it. She took another slow sip of her cocoa, letting the warmth touch places hunger couldn't reach. The waiter returned with a plate, warm rolls, buttery mashed potatoes, and grilled chicken cut into small pieces. Emma looked at it cautiously, then up at Nathaniel as if waiting for permission. "It's for you," he assured gently, "all of it." Her fingers trembled slightly as she picked up the fork, like she wasn't used to food coming without a price. "Eat slowly," he added, watching her shovel a bite into her mouth. She paused mid-chew and smiled faintly, eyes closing for a second. "It tastes like Mom's, but cleaner." He chuckled softly, then felt the tears trying to rise behind his eyes. "Emma," he said carefully, "would you like to stay somewhere warm tonight? Safer than alleys?" She looked down at her plate. "You don't have to pretend. People say that sometimes, then they leave." He shook his head. "I'm not leaving, not tonight, not ever if you don't want me to." She stared at him a long time, as if measuring his words against years of broken ones. "Why me?" she asked. "You're rich. You could have ignored me." He didn't know the full answer, only that something in her had cracked him open. "Because you looked at me like you didn't need money, just someone to care." Her eyes glistened. "Mom said that's the hardest thing to find." Nathaniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Maybe we both found something hard to find tonight." She finally smiled, a real one, gentle and glowing. For the first time, she didn't look like a girl on the street, she looked like someone who belonged. A seat at the table wasn't just about food anymore, it was a beginning. Emma's smile faded into sleep before her head even hit the plush hotel pillow, her flower still tucked under her arm like a fragile shield from a world too cruel for children to carry. Nathaniel stood by the window, his hands in his pockets, his sharp blue suit now wrinkled but forgotten, as if the man who conquered skyscrapers had suddenly become smaller than the reflection staring back at him. His chest rose slowly, pain threading through each breath, because beneath his tailored armor and power, tonight stripped him raw. He remembered his baby sister's voice calling his name as their foster father dragged her away, the faint smell of rain and rusted swings, the way she had waved that stuffed bunny like a surrender flag. He hadn't known then that it was the last goodbye. A silent scream echoed in him every time he thought of her name, the one he never spoke aloud. His jaw clenched as he watched the snowfall blur the neon lights outside. The same cold that had crept into her tiny bones now touched the glass. Emma stirred in her sleep, murmuring something incoherent, and his eyes softened like waves against a cliff. Sitting on the edge of the sofa, he gently fixed the blanket over her shoulder, brushing a golden strand from her face. "I won't disappear," he whispered to no one. The old Nathaniel, untouched by emotion, allergic to vulnerability, was gone tonight. He picked up the phone and called in quiet urgency. "It's me. I need everything you can find on an Emma, 8 years old, mother missing. No delays." The line crackled with confusion, but he didn't care. He called his lawyer next. "I want to initiate guardianship. Emergency." There was hesitation. Protocol. But Nathaniel's voice cracked slightly when he added, "She reminds me of someone I never got to save." The room fell still. He got up and poured water with trembling hands, but nothing could wash away the memory of that voicemail, his sister's voice, years ago. "Are you still coming?" He never had. But tonight, he had shown up for Emma. Not to be her hero, but to be her constant. He wasn't trying to fix her life as a project or a PR move. He was trying to anchor himself to something pure, something he lost before he ever knew how to hold it. His assistant texted back, "No sign of the mother, last known location, a shelter, disappeared 2 weeks ago." His heart sank deeper, but strangely, his resolve grew stronger, as if the universe was handing him the same test he failed long ago, now with a second chance. He paced quietly, not to wake Emma, who now clutched the flower tighter in her sleep, her lips moving faintly like she was thanking someone. He sat on the windowsill again, knees pulled up like a boy watching the storm. He thought of buying her a better coat, of replacing the shoes that barely fit her feet, but none of that mattered if he couldn't promise one thing: presents. A knock at the door startled him. It was a hotel staff member with the pink pajamas he'd ordered. He thanked them and closed the door gently. Emma was still asleep, but her brow furrowed like even in dreams she couldn't trust peace to last. "I'm here," he whispered again, not just to her, but to that little boy inside himself who never said it to his sister. He unfolded the pajamas beside her and noticed a tag that read "Warm Hugs" inside. A tiny, aching smile broke across his face. He leaned back against the wall, eyes glassy, emotions heavy, but soul healing. The walls he'd built with steel contracts and silence began to crumble with every breath she took. For the first time in years, Nathaniel didn't feel alone in the world. Not because someone needed him, but because he needed someone to need. Snow danced behind the glass, the city quieted, and for the first time since that curbside memory, he no longer feared what morning would bring. Because whatever it brought, he had already decided, he wasn't going anywhere. The snow outside had barely melted when the golden sunlight pushed through the hotel window, brushing Emma's face with soft morning warmth. And as she stirred under the fleece blanket, her blue eyes fluttered open, not to cold concrete or the sound of hurried footsteps, but to the faint aroma of coffee, the soft hum of city life muffled by thick glass, and the sound of silence, the kind that felt safe. Nathaniel had been up for hours, scrolling through reports, barely tasting the black coffee in his hand, his mind haunted by the echoes of a promise made in the dark, and when he noticed her awake, he smiled gently and said, "Good morning, little warrior." But Emma didn't ask for pancakes or cartoons. She asked for crayons and paper, quietly, as if breakfast was too heavy for a girl carrying secrets. Nathaniel tilted his head, surprised, but honored her request, handing over the hotel's notepad and a box of colored pencils the concierge had fetched. She sat at the low table, legs crossed, tongue poking out slightly in focus, as color after color blended on paper. Yellow hair, red dress, a blue van with shadows trailing behind it. Nathaniel sipped his coffee and watched, confused by the seriousness on her small face, until she turned the page toward him, her hand trembling slightly. What he saw made him sit up straighter, his heart skipping a beat. The drawing showed a small girl holding her mother's hand on one side, and on the other, a black, faceless figure grabbing her mother toward a van, her mother's free hand reaching back, her lips open as if mouthing something. Nathaniel's chest tightened as he gently asked, "Emma? What is this?" But Emma didn't meet his gaze, only stared at her lap, picking at the edge of the paper with her fingernail. "That day," she began slowly, "I was selling flowers on the corner near the bakery. Mommy was supposed to meet me after work, but she never came. I waited until the sky got dark. Then I saw her." Her voice cracked like thin glass. "Being pulled into a van by someone big, tall, like a monster made of coats. She didn't scream, she just looked at me. She mouthed something. I think it was run, so I ran." Nathaniel froze, processing the weight of each word like bricks dropped on his chest. This wasn't a story of a mother walking away. This was a kidnapping, a nightmare Emma had survived in silence. "Why didn't you tell the police?" he asked gently, his voice softer than he'd ever used in a boardroom. Emma swallowed hard, then whispered, "Because no one listens to little girls who sell flowers. They think we make things up. They tell us to go find our moms and stop playing games." Nathaniel felt a sharp pang of shame. How many Emmas had slipped through cracks like this? How many cries went unheard beneath the noise of busy streets? He reached across the table, covering her small hand with his, steady and warm, and said, "I'm listening now, and I believe you." Her eyes lifted slowly, searching his face for any trace of doubt, and when she found none, her shoulders dropped like she'd set down a boulder she'd carried too long. "Do you remember anything else?" he asked, pulling a notebook from his briefcase. Emma closed her eyes tightly, as if digging through old shadows, then said, "There was a sticker on the van's door, a bird with broken wings, like it was flying but not really. And the man, he smelled like metal, like coins or old train tracks." Nathaniel scribbled it all down, jaw tightening. This wasn't random, this was organized. He called his security chief immediately, relaying the details in code, while Emma watched with a mixture of hope and confusion. When he hung up, He knelt beside her, eyes level, and said, "What happened to your mom wasn't your fault. And now, you're not alone in this. I'm going to find her." Emma blinked, unsure whether to believe him, then looked at her drawing again. Now seeing it less as a memory and more as a map. "Promise?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I swear," Nathaniel replied, his hand over his heart like a solemn knight's vow. Then he did something he hadn't done since childhood. He tore a piece of the paper and folded it into a tiny flower, placing it in her palm, and said, "For the girl who sold flowers to survive. Now someone's going to plant gardens for you to grow in." She held it like treasure, a symbol that someone, for the first time, saw her as more than small, more than poor, more than forgettable. And in that hotel room filled with sunlight and scar tissue, the truth no longer felt like a burden. It felt like the first step towards something bigger than survival. Nathaniel didn't blink when Emma's whisper faded. He only tightened his grip on her tiny hand, as if that fragile gesture gave him permission to burn the world down if needed. He rose with fire in his veins and purpose in his spine, striding across the hotel room as if the walls were closing in. He barked orders into his phone, his voice sharp but steady, rattling off license plate numbers, suspected routes, and connections no child should ever know existed. He demanded everything: security footage, street cameras, traffic light data, then pulled strings with officials whose favors he hadn't touched in years. Meanwhile, Emma sat curled on the bed, her doll pressed to her chest, watching the man who had once only been a stranger become her soldier. Nathaniel's assistant sent over a list of known trafficking routes in the city. One address made his stomach drop. It was only 6 blocks from where he found Emma. The timing, the van, the silence, it all fit. He called in favors from 2 cybersecurity experts and asked them to scrub social media, looking for anyone who matched Emma's mother's description. His lawyer, confused but loyal, filed an emergency custody petition on Nathaniel's behalf, just in case authorities decided to separate them once this broke open. Emma didn't ask questions. She simply stared at the map he laid on the table, her finger pointing at a bakery near the alley. "She bought me a donut there, before the van." That one detail broke Nathaniel's heart in a new way, because it wasn't just a kidnapping. It was a stolen moment of joy turned into tragedy. He sent a private investigator to question the bakery owner. An hour later, a chilling confirmation came through. The woman had seen Emma's mother arguing with a man outside. Big, bald, tattoo of a crow on his neck. "That's him," Emma whispered, her voice trembling, her face pale. Nathaniel excused himself, stepped into the bathroom, and let himself crumble for 30 seconds, just enough to feel the rage, the helplessness, the need to protect that little girl from anything ever again. Then he returned, eyes steel and heart wildfire. He sat next to Emma and opened his laptop. "We're not stopping until she's found," he told her, scrolling through images of known traffickers. Emma winced at one. That one. He was in the van too. Nathaniel flagged it. They were getting closer. Every thread they pulled unraveled another: old police reports, dropped cases, missing persons swept under the rug. He slammed his fist on the table. "How many women disappear before someone notices?" he muttered, more to himself than anyone. Emma touched his sleeve. "You noticed." That stopped him cold. He stared at her, then slowly knelt beside her, taking both her hands. "Emma, I promise, no matter how long this takes, I won't stop looking. I'll move heaven and earth if I have to." Her lips trembled. "Even if you don't find her, it means everything that you tried." His throat tightened, but he nodded. "Trying isn't enough. She's out there and we're going to bring her home." Then he showed her a photo grid. "See anyone else from that night?" Emma studied the screen, hesitant, then she pointed again. "The driver, he had a limp." Nathaniel marked it, cross-referenced police records. A name emerged: Devon Slate. Arrested twice, released, untraceable for 2 years. But now, thanks to Emma's memory and Nathaniel's relentless drive, they had a target. The PI followed Devon's trail to a storage facility at the edge of the city. Nathaniel didn't wait. He chartered a car, took Emma with him, strapped safely in the back, and parked across the street, eyes fixed on the rusted fence. "Stay in the car," he said softly. She nodded, brave beyond her years. He approached the building, every step echoing like thunder in his head. He didn't know if she was inside. He didn't know what he'd find. But doing nothing was no longer an option. He met the investigator at the door. They entered together, flashlights sweeping across broken crates and rusted lockers. Nothing. Until they reached locker 18B, a scarf. Faded. Floral. Emma's mother's. He picked it up with trembling hands, then stepped back outside, heart pounding. Emma saw it through the window. Her hand flew to her mouth. "That's hers," she whispered. Nathaniel opened the car door, handed it to her like it was made of glass. "We're close," he said, his voice thick. She clutched the scarf to her chest like a lifeline. That night, back at the hotel, she didn't eat, didn't draw. Just sat by the window, watching snow fall again. Nathaniel sat beside her, the scarf folded on the table between them, a silent promise lying in soft cotton. And for the first time, the little girl who had lived in fear, and the man who had once lived in regret, sat in shared stillness, not broken, but bound by hope. Nathaniel's heart was still aching from Emma's whisper when the sudden jolt of his ringing phone sliced through the heavy silence. He stared at the screen, his fingers trembling, hesitant, hope and dread warring inside him. Answering, he barely breathed. "Yes?" A calm but urgent voice on the other end said. "Mr. Blake, this is Officer Reyes from Unit 34. We have an update." Nathaniel's entire body tensed. "Go on." "There was a raid tonight, on a suspected trafficking ring near the outskirts of the city," the officer began. Nathaniel's legs gave out, and he sat down slowly, eyes fixed on Emma who was curled up on the couch nearby, clutching a crayon. "We found a woman," the officer continued. "She was in a locked van, weak, but alive." Nathaniel clutched the phone tighter. "Her name. What's her name?" She kept repeating it. The officer paused, then added softly, "Isabel." Nathaniel's heart stopped, then surged into 1,000 racing beats. His voice cracked. "She said anything else?" The officer replied gently, "Just one thing." She kept whispering, "My daughter's waiting, with the flowers." Nathaniel's breath escaped him like a winded punch. He dropped the phone, literally dropped it, unable to hold on to the weight of the moment. It clattered to the floor, but Emma was already looking up, her blue eyes locking onto his. She didn't ask questions, she didn't blink. Something in her tiny heart had already sensed the shift in the air. Nathaniel moved slowly, walking over to her as if in a daze. He knelt before her, and for the first time in years his voice broke into raw emotion. "Emma," he choked out. She sat up, alert now, like a small bird sensing morning. "Your mom," he whispered, eyes glistening with tears he couldn't hold back. "She's alive." Time froze between them. Emma didn't scream, she didn't smile, she simply stared, like her heart couldn't quite believe it had heard right. Then, like a dam finally giving in to years of storm, she collapsed forward, into Nathaniel's arms. Her tiny fingers clawed into his jacket, as if it were the last safe place in the world. She sobbed, not loud, not messy, but deeply, in quiet waves of release. Nathaniel held her, cradling her head, trying to steady his own shaking breath. "I told the flowers to help her find me," Emma murmured into his chest. Her voice was muffled, but every word was a blade and a balm. "I knew they would." Nathaniel closed hung, his eyes, resting his cheek gently atop her hair. "You brought her back, Emma," he whispered. "You didn't stop believing." She sniffled, her little arms refusing to let go. "I watered the roses outside, every night, even when it rained," she whispered. Nathaniel's lip quivered. "You were leaving signs. For her," she said simply. "For Mommy to find her way home." Thunder rolled faintly in the distance, like the sky itself was weeping with them. Nathaniel rocked her slowly, like a lullaby only her heart could hear. "I want her to smell the roses first thing," Emma said, voice breaking mid-sentence. He kissed the top of her head. "She will, sweetheart. She will." Emma pulled back slightly, tears streaking her cheeks, but a faint glow returning to her face. "She always said flowers are messengers." Nathaniel nodded. "And yours reached her." Emma looked down at her crayon-stained hands, and whispered, "Maybe now, she'll color with me again." Nathaniel placed his palm gently over hers. You'll fill books together. They sat in silence for a moment, just breathing, just holding on. Outside, wind swept through the trees as if carrying the good news across the night. Nathaniel's mind raced with what came next: doctors, recovery, reunions, but he forced himself to stay present. To stay here, with this little girl who had changed his entire world. Emma looked up at him again. Do you think she'll remember the purple tulips I planted by the gate? He smiled gently. I think that's the first place she'll walk to. Emma's eyes sparkled through her tears. Then I'll wait there in the morning. Nathaniel brushed a tear from her cheek. You won't wait alone anymore. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight. August 3rd had begun, with a miracle. Nathaniel whispered, She survived because of you. Emma shook her head. She survived because she loves me. Nathaniel smiled softly. And now, the world will love you both. Emma rested her head on his shoulder again. This time her breathing slowed. The nightmare was not over, but the fear was melting. She had been heard, she had been believed, and now, she would be whole again. Nathaniel reached for a blanket, wrapping her gently, protectively. The same way he had once wrapped his own broken past, except this time, healing would follow. Outside, the first bird of morning chirped faintly. Emma stirred, eyes still closed, and whispered one last time, Tell her I waited, with the flowers. Nathaniel whispered back, She'll know, Emma, she already knows. And in that moment, the cold, harsh world felt a little softer. Because love had won, because a little girl believed, because a mother had survived, because someone had finally listened. The morning light crept in slowly, filtering through the clouds like hope slipping through after a long storm. Emma sat silently at the same old corner she had once claimed with nothing but a wilted bouquet and a heart heavy with loneliness, but now, there was something different. The wind still whispered through the streets, and the snow still kissed the concrete, but this time, she wasn't waiting, she was remembering. Beside her stood her mother, Isabel, frail yet upright, with her arm wrapped around her daughter's shoulders as if afraid letting go would wake her from a dream. The scarf around Isabel's neck wasn't enough to hide the bruises, but her smile, worn yet radiant, spoke louder than any wound. Emma looked up at her, eyes glistening with unshed tears, her little fingers entwined with the stems of the flowers she used to sell for survival. This time, they were not for sale. They were a celebration. Across the street, Nathaniel stood motionless in his sharp royal blue coat, but his eyes were softer than ever. He had seen cities built, empires crumble, fortunes rise and fall, but nothing had ever shaken him quite like the image before him. Emma turned, spotted him, and a smile burst across her face like sunrise over snow. Without a word, she handed the flowers to her mother and bolted across the road, her boots crunching over icy pavement, arms already stretching wide before she reached him. She flung herself into his chest with all the weight of her small body and all the love her big heart had held in silence. You were my flower, she whispered, her voice cracking like delicate glass, the one that never faded, even when everything else did. Nathaniel swallowed the lump in his throat, pressing his hand gently to the back of her head, afraid even his breath might break the moment. He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes, those deep, stormy blue eyes that had haunted him since the day she asked, Do you know how it feels to be forgotten? He remembered how lost he'd been before she arrived in his life like an unexpected bloom between the cracks. And you, he whispered back, were the one who made me feel again. Behind them, Isabel watched quietly, her face a portrait of disbelief and grace, holding the bouquet Emma had once used to beg strangers to notice her. Now they were the ribbon that tied 3 broken lives together. The snow began to fall again, soft and silent, blanketing the morning in gentle wonder. Passers-by walked by, some hurrying to work, some stopping to glance, unaware of the miracle unfolding right beside them. One man smiled, then paused, as if sensing something sacred had just happened, but he said nothing, choosing to let the moment breathe. Isabel crossed the street slowly, each step careful, like someone learning to walk again, not just on feet, but in faith. Emma ran to her and grabbed her hand, then looked at Nathaniel. Can she stay with us? She asked, eyes hopeful but unsure. Not can, Nathaniel said softly. She will. Isabel's lips trembled. You don't have to, she began. But I want to, he interrupted gently. Not out of pity, but because she gave me you. And you gave me purpose. Emma held one of their hands in each of hers, a bridge between past pain and future peace. They stood like that for a while, three souls, no longer lost. A gust of wind rustled through Emma's coat, and a few flower petals escaped the bouquet, floating into the air like soft promises. Nathaniel looked down at Emma. You still believe in flowers, even after everything? She nodded. Flowers don't give up, even in the cold they bloom. Nathaniel smiled, and for the first time in years it reached his eyes. A small dog wandered by, sniffed at Emma's boots, then barked playfully and scurried off. Emma giggled, and it was the most honest sound the street had heard in months. Isabel chuckled too, then winced slightly, and Nathaniel instinctively moved to support her. You'll heal, he said, not just your body, but your soul, I promise. She looked up at him, tears brimming. I never thought anyone would come. She believed, he said, nodding toward Emma. And she made me believe too. A car horn blared in the distance, and the city returned to its usual rhythm, but something had shifted. On that ordinary corner where life often rushed past and sorrow often went unnoticed, something sacred had taken root. Compassion, connection, redemption. Emma turned back to the spot where she used to sit alone, and for a second, her smile faded. Do you think there are other little girls still waiting? She asked quietly. Nathaniel knelt beside her. I know there are. She looked up, determined. Then let's find them. No one should have to wait forever. He paused, breath catching in his throat. We will, he said, together. The wind picked up slightly, and snow danced around their feet like confetti. Isabel moved closer, wrapping her arms around both of them. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. For giving me back my little girl. Nathaniel shook his head. She was never lost, just waiting to be seen. As they walked away, the three of them, once strangers, now moved like family, and in the place where Emma had once begged with petals and tears, hope now stood tall, rooted not in fortune or fame, but in one simple truth. Someone stayed. Not for applause, not for headlines, but because real love never walks away. And those who choose,